French President Emmanuel Macron has announced that there is a raise in the country's minimum wage and the scrapping of taxes on overtime. He made the announcement in a speech aimed at addressing the so-called Yellow Vest protest movement beginning on Paris streets a month ago. More than 1,700 were arrested nationwide in France. In the capital, protesters caused widespread damage. Take a look at the latest.
A new tone from French President Emmanuel Macron. Sounding humbled and apologetic, he told France he knows he's made mistakes.
Doubtless we haven't answered your worries quickly enough over the last 18 months. I take responsibility for this and for creating the impression that it wasn't my concern, that I had other priorities. I also know I've hurt some of you with my remarks.
Recognising his government's been seen as dictating from Paris, he promised to visit mayors across France. He announced the minimum wage will be going up €100 a month starting in January. Taxes on overtime hours will be scrapped and low-income pensioners will get a tax break. But he defended his controversial decision to end a tax on wealth, insisting the cut creates jobs.
We will respond to the economic and social urgency with strong measures, by cutting taxes more rapidly, by keeping our spending under control.
The president is looking for ways to end weeks of demonstrations that have already hit the country's economy. On what should have been the busiest shopping weekends of the year in the run-up to Christmas, the French Retail Association says shops saw a 17% drop in foot traffic. Shopkeepers are running out of patience.
It's intolerable. It's unacceptable to have this degree of violence at protests. And what's really a shame is that some people are taking advantage of the protests to loot shops because the police are busy elsewhere and can't intervene.
The protesters say this government and previous leaders have ignored the everyday concerns of low-income people for decades. The question now is whether this will be enough to make them feel listened to, or whether a crack has opened in French society that President Macron will be hard pushed to repair.
So was Mr. Macron's response to the protesters enough? Will France once again come back to peace? We have with us in our Beijing studio Cui Hongjian, head of the European Studies Department with China Institute of International Relations. In Paris, we invited Joe Rouet, who is the chairman of the Bridge Tank. And in Brussels, we have Alexis Poulain, the co-founder of Le Monde Modern. Welcome to the three of you. Gentlemen, I want to start by asking you, Mr. Rouet, you heard the speech, apologetic. You heard about the policies. Will that be able to turn back the clock, or rather be able to change the situation a bit on the streets?
Tianwei, ni hao. I think it was part apologetic and part, I'm happy to be here again, part apologetic and part giving the direction. Apologetic was important because President Macron committed himself to politics because he had felt this disarray in the French society, and the French society had felt he had abandoned that on the way. So he got apologetic on his miscommunication, on his lack of explanation about the measures, and maybe on being too hurried on some of those measures. So I think that this will bring back the confidence in a majority of the Yellow Vests. That's definite. And that will bring back the confidence all the more that he started re-explaining what are his reforms. Yesterday, we could hear again a President Macron, which we had been hearing during the campaign when he was elected and giving the support by the people. And he said that his legitimacy comes from the people. So I think this can definitely help in putting France back on track and in putting the confidence that the President knows what is the track of reforms.
I see. Mr. Poulain, to you, we see the French President have been taking some measures. For example, Mr. Macron has sought to appease the protesters by eliminating taxes on overtime pay, cutting taxes for pensioners, and also offering an end-of-the-year bonus to workers. But some suggest this is only minor relief to some of the middle class. You know, of course, views are very different. But what do you think? Will these measures be able to at least help those angry on the streets to go back home and think about not just what they're going to get, but also what Mr. Macron has been suggesting, the long-term economic prospect of the country?
I don't think this measure will be enough for the people wearing the yellow vest in the street. It might be okay for the public opinion, the wider public opinion of France, thinking that enough is enough. As you said, the shops have to reopen and the economy has to start again because we're going to a halt. But for the people wearing yellow vest, clearly there's another objective now, is to get Macron out of the Elysée. It was what they were chanting in the street from the start, and it is still what they want. It's been too little, too late for these people, and the measures that have been announced yesterday, some of them were in the campaign program of Emmanuel Macron. So it's not just extraordinary measure, it's just something that he promised that would happen in 5 years, and because of the protest he had to put on the table now a measure that he was planned to use later in his mandate to be re-elected, maybe in 2022. So clearly the anger is still there, and it's not clear what will the yellow vest do next weekend and the week after.
Right. Mr. Cui, of course, nobody should suggest that the yellow vest people on the streets are necessarily going to represent the majority of those French inside the country. And therefore, what they want, are they necessarily the rest of the country want? That's also a big question mark. Having said that, though, Mr. Cui, no secret, French economy not doing well. Even for the recent quarter, the growth rate has been dropped down, the prediction from 0.4 to now only 0.2. And also, the reason why President Macron earlier argued about tax cuts for businesses and so on is for reviving, as he sees it, the way to of the economy. So, Mr. Cui, how will France be able to balance so-called the short term with those who feel they are being disadvantaged vis-à-vis the long term of the prospect of the economy, Mr. Cui?
Yes, I think it would be very difficult for France, for President Macron to take a balance between this so-called development or economic growth and maybe at the same time the more fair, distribution, like we want to find recently for this yellow vest movement. I think this movement is also a showcase how it is difficult for French government to keep the balance. As we know, so far maybe the big problem or challenge for French economy is how to improve its competitiveness by doing some reform, maybe of course for long term. But now the question is for majority, in the French society.
Right.
I don't think the people, they are ready to maybe sacrifice for this reform. I think that would be very, very big problem. And I think that this televised speech by President Macron, it should happen earlier, not on this time. If President Macron gives some more clear, ideas to his people before or at the very beginning of his reform, I think that would be good, or would be better for the society to have some more endurance.
Well, it is no secret, Mr. Rouet, that France is trying to restructure its economy. You and I all know it's going to be very important for the economy's future prospects. Meanwhile, the country is also trying to handle its debt problems, because Macron has asked his other EU partners to be able to watch out what they have in their debts. And certainly nobody knows this tax cuts and also further pensions, where the money going to come from. So Having said that, though, how do you see the Macron administration is going to balance that to avoid political crisis, but at the same time to be prudently push forward what they have also in their campaign promises, which is to make the economy great? I wouldn't use again, but rather it is a trend.
Well, it's a very great question. To answer it, I need to maybe first disagree with what was said before. We have a low growth, but we have employment. We have had job creations. The second thing is that President Macron has also promised he will study a new tax, whereby companies which are making profit in our country will be taxed, and that will call for redistribution. That way to solve some of the revendication, the sound revendication of the Yellow Vest, and not just the revendication that we will oust the president. That's just radical. It's not the majority even of the Yellow Vest. You know, so this measure can help, and this can help finance. And the last thing is about competitiveness. Many studies show we are competitive. What we lack now is a way for the people to spend. We need some consumption contribution to the economy, and I think that this measure of €100 might sound not enough, but it's like adding a 13th month of salary to people who earn 12 months of low salary. That can help boost the growth and can be financed. I'm rather optimistic.
Can be financed. How will that be financed to you? Well, how is it likely to be financed? I mean, you talk about the taxing the tech firms, you know, Google or others, particularly American firms. But yes, you could do that, and yet that's likely to also impact people's image about France as an investment destination. And at the same time, how sustainable will that be? And how much eventually can they really provide to give momentum and sentiment in a way to what you have just argued, to revive the economy?
Investors never come to a country just because they have zero tax. They come because they will make profit, first of all, and because the economy is interesting as a market. Let's take the example of Huawei. Huawei has chosen France to be the headquarters of its European activities. Huawei contributes more to jobs creation in France than many other companies, French companies, which have become multinational.
But the question is, Mr. Brouet, Huawei or another company from any other country is not going to revive the French economy, right? You have to revive your own economy. So generally speaking, where does the money come from? That is the question. I guess that's also the question the president has to think about.
I know. You're absolutely right, Chanwei. But the fact that we have foreign companies coming shows the vitality of the French economy. It's not nice to praise the French multinationals. I wanted to praise rather the investors, one of them being Chinese. Investors are willing to come. Many studies. The day Mr. Macron was preparing, Friday, when he was preparing for the police organization of Saturday, he received a large delegation from the Silicon Valley for the startup nations. They were interested, they're still interested in funding the new economy of France. So we have the way to finance that. Just a minor qualification, this €100 more is not on the salary. So it's more on the prime. So it will not, first of all, have a snowball effect on all the other salaries, so it's very limited to the people who have the lowest salaries. That's the first thing. And B, second of all, it will not be, I would say, eligible to later earnings like pensions, retirement schemes. So it's very limited in terms of cost.
So Mr. Poulin,
hidden costs.
Mr. Poulin, this is a precedent. It seems that President Macron, in response to the latest crisis going on in the country, he sets. It gives a signal also to the others. Once they go onto the streets, once they protest in the way of a riot, as long as they do it long enough, there could be possibility that policies toward them can be changed. So many wonder also, despite of the fact that it's important for the government to listen to the voices of people on the streets, but what about this precedence it seems that the president is now setting in front of him?
Well, it's not the first time. I mean, France has a long standing culture of revolution and revolt. And clearly the French think that going in the street actually is the best way to get heard when governments don't want to hear. So it's just another iteration of this. We had May 68, we had the French Revolution, but other riots in 47, for example. So it's just the way French do politics. And clearly it is sad that a country has to go to the street to be heard and to get a little bit of money from the big companies that don't want to pay the workers so that they can live decently. The problem is here is that how come in rich countries like France we're not able to just give the workers the minimum wage that is sufficient to live with dignity in France?
Right.
That is the main question, and it's not about 100 or whatever. President Macron also asked for help from his friends from the big companies, and today we've heard that big companies from CAC 40 like Free, Orange will give an end-of-year prime to their people working for them. This is very sad to hear that you have to riot actually to get the money. This should be normal, that actually the work is coming back as money to the workers, or not just as profit to the shareholders.
Okay. Mr. Cui, we only have 1 minute left. So from your perspective, what's going on in France, the so-called Yellow Vest movement, is the crystallization of the divide in some of the economies we have seen, particularly as a result of the wealth gap, particularly as a result of what some believe at disadvantage during the process. Will measures this time and the ways President Macron handles be able to help others also to find a way out? Or is it more likely to slow down whatever reform process this president is having in mind? So do the others.
Yeah. Yes, I think that once this, at this moment, and this movement maybe will keep slowing down in the future. But I think still there are some bad, outcomes for this from this movement. Not only for the economy for France, because we know now the next question for Macron's government is how could get some more financial support to pay for some promise from him. Second problem is how about the very negative impact on his reform, because once President Macron wants to continue his reform, I think some similar situation will happen in future. At that time, once these steps or some measures happen once again, it will give some more bigger problem for the French society.
We certainly have seen some very different views coming from our three panelists, particularly those inside France and those from outside the country. We'll see how things would evolve from here. For now, thank you so much, all of you, for your input. Cui Hongjian, Joe Ruette, and Alexis Poulon. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.